Hello. So today, some reflections on the power of words, particularly words or labels that are used by others sometimes to describe us, perhaps not very accurately. And here, not looking at what these words mean, not looking for definitions. And I suspect some of them will have different meaning and certainly different resonance for a number of us. But looking at the power, the kind of impact that they can have. Now, I confess that I can sometimes be quite sensitive to the words that are used, labels that are used. I can be sensitive to swear words still, much less so than I used to be. And very often I may be reading very much more into what's said than what is actually intended. It's usually where I feel triggered is where I have a sense of a pointed insult, or there is a hint of an attack, a hint of aggression that I am wary of. It sort of gets alarm bells, not necessarily ringing loudly, but on alert for me. Some words do seem to carry quite a strong negative um, energy that I'd rather not have to bear. My sensitivity, and I suspect this may be the case for others who may feel similarly sensitive, may largely be down to associations that I made with some of these words, memories of associations with some of these words when I was younger. And of course, words and their meaning and their impacts have changed. So swear words, or quite a few common swear words, are much, much more common in the UK, commonly accepted, I should say, than perhaps they were 30 or 40 years ago. A lot of words now are just seen as individuals venting their anger and not to be interpreted as invariably being about malintent, actually having an intention to offend others. So still some words at times can still unexpectedly trigger different feelings for us. And sometimes those are feelings of shame or guilt or just taking strong offense. When and where I heard a word in the past, associations about their intentions probably ties fairly directly. There's probably quite a strong correlation, I would think, with how much they're likely to trigger for me and sort of act as something that might convict me, if I am feeling embarrassed or feeling guilty. So, for example, the word sissy for me wasn't really very common when I was much younger. I didn't come across that very often. So it's not a word that triggers very much for me. It doesn't really mean very much, to be honest. And it's not one I don't think that's ever been, at least public to my knowledge, used against me. So I'm getting much better with this, and I suspect most of us do as we get a bit older and we get a bit wiser. And if you post videos on a channel like this, or if you have a blog speaking about your trans nature, your cross-dressing and so on, it comes with the territory, really, that once in a while you're going to get the odd comment from someone who perhaps thinks they're being clever by being usually pretty ignorant, I think, but maybe by being offensive and just expressing some contempt for what you're doing or for yourself, for whatever reason. So these days, I usually let those kind of comments just lie, go straight above my head, and consider many of them probably to be born out of ignorance, or as an individual sitting behind a keyboard somewhere and just tapping away anything that comes into their mind. However, I think the words that can trigger feelings that are not necessarily helpful can probably be grouped into three main areas. Although there's a huge overlap in terms of what words can be grouped under each of these headings, as it were, they're not meant to be exclusive. And indeed, when I was putting together some suggestions here, which I put together as little slides, I think that some of the words in at least one or two of the groups could appear in each of the others as well. So yeah, these aren't perfect splits, but by grouping, trying to identify the source or the potential sources of the triggers. So firstly, there are those that seem to have something to do with ideas about what society condemns as being disgusting behavior or disgusting expressions of dress or mannerisms or whatever. Some of these occasionally can be a little disturbing for me, and especially if I have even the briefest hint of a belief or an idea myself that I might condemn myself in this way, that what I do is disgraceful or pitiful, and not just here for what others think, but also because I have a faith, what I believe God may regard as well. And this is one of the reasons that I'm putting together this series of reflections on the subject of abomination, to help me articulate and understand what this is all about, and in the process, hopefully offering some food for thought for others as well. Then there are words that might mark us out as one to be ostracized or attacked by a group. And some of these have in the past been quite convicting. I remember times at school where homosexuality was spoken about, perhaps from a platform somewhere, and I felt a flush of embarrassment, even though I was sitting in a crowd, and to my knowledge, there weren't. I wasn't obviously going to be picked out and named and shamed in that group. But feeling this sense that I might somehow be exposed, that what was within me might be exposed. I felt that in church way back in the day as well, when I used to go to an evangelical church, and sometimes particular sermons were preached on issues of sexual morality that might touch on this. So such words as sicko, sissy fall into this category. And I think my conviction is very much about not wanting to be ostracized, picked out, and even words that don't actually apply to me as such. So words such as puff or ladyboy, I don't think would apply to me. Or some might disagree, but I don't think that would have been used against me by my peer group in my school and earlier life, for example. But those words can still have an impact. They can still be this kind of trigger for some strange embarrassment. That said, I've come a long way in letting go this fear of ostracism. I've actually come to embrace enjoying being a little bit of an outsider at times, a little bit different, and very much more accepting of whatever people want to think of me and call me. And happily, most don't usually resort to insults. Finally, there are those words that are about deviancy or perversion that touch on possibly wrong assumptions about what is moral or immoral sexual behavior and presentation. And these may remind me that I'm not considered normal and maybe acting or presenting in a supposed, in a way that society expects or accepts me to behave. I've had much to say about this in other videos, so I won't dwell on it here. It's perhaps not nice to be thought of, or indeed actually to be, according to the dictionary definitions, a pervert. But if that's the way it is for me, that's the way it is. And I'm comfortable being me as one who does not set out to harm or offend others. So I think the question that arises from all of this is, should I or we be so sensitive to the words others use to label us, our behavior or presentation? Well, maybe this can sometimes be a lot easier to answer than to put into effect, given that some of these words, the triggers can be very deep-rooted and need quite a bit of processing to weed out. Even if we may change and become more fully self-assured as we grow older, a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy perhaps here can help, actually just reminding ourselves when the triggers occur, what really might be going on here, just being mindful of why we might be getting embarrassed or feeling some sense of shame or whatever, and putting that in context. And also perhaps sometimes checking our judgments of others in terms of the intensity of their, any interpretation we're putting behind the intensity of their insults, and possibly also seeing that some of those, let's say, more ignorant comments that might appear on social media may well come from people that actually really need to be careful. They're actually maybe just being rude online because that's their outlet, and therefore actually having even a degree of sympathy and a letting go of any personal attachment to what they might have to say. Of course, ultimately, it's important to trust our own judgment of ourselves. And for me, that is about it's okay to be different, that we do not need to be defined by the labels of others, and particularly ones that don't serve us, or indeed others as well. So words can play into the perception we may have about abomination, at least for some of us. And I think that when this happens, again, we just need to be aware of what may be happening and mindful of the possible triggers. If we give in too easily to the not invariably fair or justified scorn of others, I think we risk becoming our own worst enemies.